Hello everybody, welcome to today's stream. Apologies for being a few minutes later than planned. Cards on the table, we've had a few technical difficulties with regards to getting the video on from Juho. So we've got his audio but not the video today. But I don't think that matters too much. So on today's stream, what we want to talk about today is kind of following on from the last conversation and based upon some feedback I got from some of the people who were tuning in last time is we want to focus a little bit about the toolbox that we've now created. And this is the first one, a two-part stream. And today we're going to focus on engagement. So how do you use that toolbox to engage the audience, your learners, when you're trying to essentially convey or train people on a course or a series of learning on platform. But from our perspective today, we're looking at platform engagement specifically. Next Tuesday, we are having Laura Overton back on the stream, and she'll be talking about the using or engagement at a course level or a content level. So we're trying to cover two facets here because fundamentally we recognise that you have to have both to be able to actually maintain an audience and their attention span over a period of time that lasts longer than just say doing a piece of content. You have to have the great content to attract them and obviously to maintain their interest, but you also have to use techniques that we'll discuss today and tools that you'll discuss today that mean that you're using the platform in the right way and understanding which pieces to use and when. So yeah, let's get into it. So without much further ado, I'm going to introduce my colleague Juho. So you're not going to see him, as I said before, but Juho, why don't you introduce yourself and give everybody an understanding of who you are and what you do in your speciality.
Sure. So, hello everybody. My name is Juho Hoppion, and I work as a digital learning consultant here at Valamis. So I basically design these platforms and learning solutions with our customers. And yeah, I guess that's about it.
Thank you very much. So before we get into the ins and outs of the specifics of engagement, what I wanted to actually do is share an image with everybody here. I just got a notification that we seem to be getting an echo in sound. Let me just, I'm just put my headset on. Hopefully that resolves the issue. Bear with me 2 seconds. Let's just feed the audio through from my side. Could you just give me a... Okay, it's not working for our stream. If everyone just bears with me 2 seconds. I should just be able to sort this out very quickly. Could you give us a... Okay. I'll tell you what, I'm going to ignore that. This doesn't need to be working. If you talk, I will mute myself when you're going to talk, so we'll have a back and forth.
Yeah, no, I can hear you.
So, okay, before we get into it, what I want to do is show you something that we have that we've knocked up, just as an example of the kind of things that are available to us today on various platforms to use in the way of content or the ways that we can engage with learners. This does include content, but it also includes some things that sit outside of that. So around this image, and I'll make this image available for people to have after this stream goes live and we finish with it. But fundamentally here, what you can see is that we have the typical set of areas grouped as I've seen them. Sorry, bear with me, I'm just getting a bit more chat. Okay, so we have assessments, media, social, digital events, live events, all things you'd probably expect. I've also added an extra option there, which is additional engagement around self-authoring. Self-authoring, gamification, Marcom systems and ad campaigns. And the reason I've added those will probably become clear later on, but I look at those as ways that we can engage possibly outside the norm in which you're used to. Some will use these, some will not, and it will also depend upon where you sit. If you're within L&D or if you're in an external provider of content to an L&D function. But just as a point here, I would argue that with the exception of live events, every single one of these can be delivered via digital means. So if you think about that in the context of how many ways we can still engage with learners, um, in spite of all the issues we're having at the moment with remote working, it's still incredible. There's so many ways that we can connect with people. We don't have to resort to sending a video or sending a slide deck or or a typical piece of e-learning to our audience. Yes, those might be appropriate, as we said in the last stream, but at the end of the day, please don't be pigeonholed into thinking that's the only way we can achieve success. Touching on the live events for a moment, there's 4 in there that I've called out. There may be some others, but we've got workshops, seminars, lectures, coaching, and mentoring. And actually, you'll see that coaching and mentoring also appears in things such as digital events, because that can still be done digitally or via a phone, for example. So, of the 3 remaining, arguably things like workshops, seminars, and lectures could even be converted into digital events. So, what we're really saying is there's no excuse. There are ways for us to get content to people and a variety of ways to do that. And I just wanted to highlight that before we start. And also, as I said before, pull in some of these ideas about additional engagement tools. So hopefully that just sets a scene about where we might go with some of these things. So probably is a good point now to cut back to our guest, Juho, and ask a question here, which is, quite a broad brushstroke, and let's see where this goes, but what kind of challenges are you seeing, our customers facing, and how are they dealing with those in light of the current situation with COVID?
Hey, so I think we are having a little bit of lag here. If you could actually unmute yourself here on the stream, so that because now I'm hearing myself double because I have to listen to the stream audio as well. So with the COVID situation, I mean, mostly what we have been doing is with some of our customers trying to um, enable their learners to do as much online as possible in a very small time frame. So it has been a very interesting challenge, because of course we are in this situation as a this is a global phenomenon. Everybody is trying to find solutions for this, and really the kind of content that has kind of risen on the top, that has seen the most demand, is it tends to be quick, it tends to be very limited in scope, so it's not like a huge broad general level look. It's something very specific that people are looking for, and it tends to be in video format. So they're looking for, those 2-minute tips and tricks videos about something very specific. That's what I've seen, at least mostly in what I've been working with.
Okay, that's hugely interesting. So, I mean, I think everybody knows that video is one of those areas where, the majority of content gets sourced. I mean, YouTube is, and I think I said this on stream number 1, is the second most searched, was the second most used search engine on the internet. So clearly, video is something that's important to people. Um, when we're looking at engagement, I'm thinking it from a platform perspective. Now, how would we, you've called out there that there's, those 2-minute videos, but how do we know that? So what I'm kind of driving at is we've seen videos of content of say 15 minutes long or 10 minutes long, or even 30 minutes long potentially. But you were very specific there. You spoke about 2, 3 minutes maybe. So how does a learning function or a creator of content understand about the length of video format and how that's right? What's driving that understanding?
Really, of course, it comes down to the topic itself. So there are topics that you cannot do in 2 minutes, of course, and it needs to be explained in a broader sense. But mostly how we get this information is by looking at reporting. So we look at the reporting data that we get from people using our systems, and we see that, okay, these kinds of pieces of content are getting the most engagement, and so that means that they are, if not objectively the best pieces of content, they are at least the ones that people think that they're going to find the most value in. And I think it has to do with time investment, because I mean, when you're talking about learners who are learning while working, they don't have leisure time. They don't have like an hour a day to spend on learning. So I think that's also it really comes down to the mentality of using a learning system in a job environment, because you need to make that time that you use for learning as effective as possible. So I think there's an appeal to shorter content based on just that. I'm not saying that 15-minute videos are a bad idea. They definitely are not, and there are topics that you need 15 minutes to explain. But in general, people tend to lean towards those shorter pieces of content because I think people are also kind of, especially if it's related to their field, they are confident that they know the basics enough so that to get some information on a very specific topic, they will grasp the general idea from a couple of minutes of video. But this is, of course, a very specific use case. Mostly these videos are something that people film by themselves. They're taking a selfie video or something and posting it online, and other people are going to take a look at that. So this is a very specific use case. Of course, this is we are also, of course, seeing a lot of usage for webinars and basically scheduling events in a calendar. So if there are something happening online for a larger audience, we are seeing usage rising for that kind of content as well. People are using calendars a lot more. They are scheduling events and they are signing up for them.
So what you're seeing is there is a shift in our customer base of people having a more, let's just say, a purposeful flow of engagement through the platform. They're using the curation tools to build pathways for people, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Especially in environments that are basically designed to be a bit more maybe organized and rigid, if that word can be used. So something where they have a very specific and pre-planned set of content that is aimed to certain audiences. Especially in those environments, we're actually seeing a rise in people using this kind of freer material. They're actually looking for something that is not necessarily targeted to them based on what they're doing at their jobs, but they're just trying to find what the system has to offer, and they tend to lean toward those shorter pieces of content, or then using the calendar to book events.
Okay, that's really interesting. So when we've got people, when we've got users on platform, we've got them. The content's hooked them. As I said, we'll touch on that with Laura about how we create compelling and engaging content. But we have all this list, as we can still see on screen, of things that we can use. You know, I'm not saying it's the best way because I suspect there isn't a way that it's different in every application. But you know, is it your experience that we're using some of these areas and not all of them? And are there situations where you could see where we could potentially use more of the areas that I've shown on this graphic to better build out the engagement across not just that learning stream, but maybe across the platform in general?
Definitely, there's a lot of room to diversify how you are providing content for your learners in basically every single solution that I've ever been involved in. But it really comes down to, of course, what kind of content do you have to provide to your users, to your learners, and are you building that content yourself? Are you hiring a professional to build that content? And actually, to tie in with the topic of today, I think if we're talking about engagement on platform level, one of the things that tend to be problematic, it's kind of two sides of the same coin. So either you are paying way too much attention to the content itself and the format of the content, especially if you have a lot of content that you need to get to your users, and that tends to happen on the expense of the platform itself. So maybe the navigation isn't that thought out. Maybe we're not thinking about what the metadata of that content should be, so that we can categorize stuff intelligently and use recommendations and stuff like that in a straightforward, easy way. Or then they are paying too much attention to how all of this should be built in a technical sense, and then we really don't have any content to really leverage the system that has been designed well. So it's really a marriage of these two things, and they kind of need to support each other, and designing the one will inform how to design the other. So it's kind of a iterative conversation that will keep on going until we have some actual design that we want to implement. So it's not something that can be just said that this is a perfect solution for absolutely everybody. It comes down to the use cases. And definitely I would like to see more ideas on how to use, for example, social learning tools. So we have instant messaging, we have discussion boards, forums, we have, you mentioned wikis and blogs here, but so far I think they are still requiring a bit too much of effort and time from the customer, be it on the user side or on the customer designer side, to actually come up with something that would bring a lot of value to the table. So of course we can do those, but without a very good design plan and an idea and a well mapped out use case, it's kind of a stab in the dark, you know. So it will be good or it won't be. So there are not many organizations that kind of want to take that leap yet, because we don't really have a lot of those examples in the, especially in corporate learning.
Yeah, I get that. It is a challenge, and I'd say the same. I think the social tools, they're a bit of a, I think they're a bit scary for a lot of organisations because it's taking, to some degree, it's giving control, back to learners. And in the last stream, I spoke about self-authoring, but to some degree, well, you have workflows in place for self-authoring that can mitigate the risk associated with it. But when something's put into a forum or a blog and it's out there, sometimes it can be a little bit scary for L&D functions to kind of like let go of the reins a little bit.
Yeah.
I've got there's a question in the chat from Laura Overton, who obviously I say was she on our first stream. She's on the next one, so so thank you, Laura, for joining this one, albeit as a viewer. And you're saying about the results of learning, so which applications are best met by the different media. I'm going to push that to you home momentarily because he may even have some examples or some data that bears that out. But just something touching upon both points that were just made and the question you there from Laura. On things about social media, I've seen wikis using a very interesting way of late, which is as a form of FAQ or internal resource by which is a reference guide that people can utilize, whether that's by way or involved in an onboarding program or an area where there are a certain a it's useful to have a document that's maintained, but a live document that can be linked out to pieces of learning that might supplement it, or other white papers or documentation on an intranet. But that wiki page for that topic serves as the holy grail of information around that point. It's something that has been able to it's been in existence for years in terms of a wiki, but I've seen it used recently in ways that kind of hark back to the old days of having an encyclopedia of information, albeit one that's business specific. So there are ways and there are situations where things like wikis are very useful if used appropriately. They don't solve
Exactly.
every problem. But I mean, could you give some insight in response to Laura's question there in relation to some of the other media types that we have on the graphic on screen potentially?
Well, one thing that I've been dealing lately in the last couple of weeks actually is we're talking about tests and quizzes, and I think this type of thinking around exams really it comes from, we have all been to school and we've taken exams, and frankly, uh, based on my training as a teacher, like an actual classroom teacher, exams are a horrible way of measuring anything. So what I'm really trying to strive towards, for example, in many of my deliveries, is that we are kind of getting away from that mentality of using tests and quizzes and exams to measure what's going on, because we do have that reporting data. It's a lot better way to get actual insight of how people are doing in the system without having to come up with arbitrary ways of measuring whether or not they have gone through content or something like that. Quizzes, of course, where the point is not to be correct, but test your knowledge and get that information for yourself, how well you are doing in this topic. That's a good idea. And survey, of course, what do you think about this content, or what do you think about this site, or whatever. That's a good idea. But getting away from that exam mentality, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that usually comes up with every single customer. especially those who haven't dealt with digital learning previously. Um, Reading through this right now, one interesting thing as well when we were thinking about content, it's not a problem in itself, but it can be problematic, is that a lot of our customers have a lot of content that's ready-made, and it's usually in PowerPoint format or it's a PDF. So how to leverage that content that's already ready, how to leverage that in the system? We can of course put that all up and it will work just as it does, with any like PowerPoint presentation tool or a PDF tool, but it kind of caters to a different type of engagement, because PowerPoints are not generally, for example, they're not designed for self-learning. They're designed for being presented. So it's also kind of, it can be difficult to try to describe the need to go through pre-existing material with the mentality that, is this actually going to support anybody who's going to go through this material? Are they going to be able to get what this content is about without the actual presentation around it? Of course, PowerPoints can be built to be self-learning material as well, but I've seen a lot of cases where, we have this material, let's put it up, and when it's there, it's not actually getting any engagement because it hasn't been designed for that purpose originally. So I think that comes down to content type integrations in any system. So there's a lot of pressure on making sure that the pre-existing material is actually usable in this context. What else do we have here? Well, VR, AR, that's an interesting thing. I've seen mostly this on demo level, and it's basically still on idea level. There are some implementations existing in the world where VR is actually used pretty efficiently in a learning environment, but it's pretty costly. And once again, because it costs a lot just in terms of getting that technology, the use cases have to be very, very specific, or they have to be mapped out very well so that the organizations that's actually paying for that will know that this will serve their interests and this will actually bring some value to the table. It's a really, really interesting way of completely rethinking the learning environments that we can build, but we're still seeing a kind of a threshold here just based on the price of the technology and the availability of that as well. You mentioned self-authoring in the previous video as well. I think that is an excellent way of getting engagement, and really it comes down to how you want to build the environment. So you can kind of have this sandbox type of place within the environment where people are able to use authoring tools and create their own content, and it can be usually restricted in a way that it's not readily available for absolutely everybody else. There can be a curation step there, so somebody who is actually responsible for the content in the system can check that out and decide whether or not it should be public for everybody else in the system as well. Gamification is a word that I don't really like because, frankly, it doesn't mean a lot. It's kind of gotten that buzzword quality to it. There are good ways of gamifying and there are bad ways of gamifying, and basically it comes down to the fact that if you just copy what games are doing, like a list of achievements or a leaderboard, that doesn't really do anything in itself. That does not drive engagement. You need to have that engagement in order for those approaches to really mean anything. Just wanted to throw that in there since it's on the list.
I completely agree. I've got a great example of that. I say a few years, it's some years ago now, I used a training provider in a coding space to learn to code in a new language. And when I went through that process, they use gamification heavily, badges and things like that. And I am myself someone that enjoys playing computer games in my spare time, and for me that badge system was really great. But your point is exactly right. It's the fact that I was really engaged with the process and the content. The fact that there were badges didn't actually improve my engagement. I didn't go against peers in my field and start showing them off in that sense. But I have seen recently some compelling reasons to have badges. We're currently running a project um, where we are helping one of our customers here in the UK to be able to use badges as a way of an online portfolio of capability. So as they move
Yeah.
between different business units in a very, very complex organization, they're able to showcase their capabilities very quickly by the visual recognition of a badge in a certain area. So they're using it as their kind of online portfolio or online CV, if you will. But the point is that they're using it in a way that's meaningful, and therefore the acquisition of that badge is important, and it is a level of engagement at that point, not just like a kind of like, oh, I got this because just by the chance of I'm interested in this topic.
Exactly,
Exactly.
exactly. I mean, it needs to be tied to some value that is external to the content itself that's providing you with a badge. That same thing goes pretty much with any other gamification approach, and what you said about being able to display those badges as kind of a, well, it's proof of your learning and your knowledge. That's that is the external value. And if you're thinking about a game where an actual game that you're playing and you get some badges or achievements there, I mean, you're not engaging with that game because you get badges. You're actually playing the game and enjoying that. So that's why you're doing it. And what the achievement and badge thing can actually do is, when you're kind of done playing that game, you can see your list of badges and see, oh, there's actually a couple that I would get if I played a couple of more hours. So that's like what they achieve at that point. But
But
yeah, it really needs a well thought out use case. Once again, if you want to use gamification, it's thrown around kind of like a magic wand that solves things and makes things cool, but really it's not. And a worst case scenario is that you kind of put these gamified aspects in your learning environment without really thinking about it, and just kind of willy-nilly. Wow, I used willy-nilly in a live stream. I like that. And then people are actually disengaging because they feel it's stupid. It doesn't really bring anything to the table. They're like, why am I getting a badge out of this? This is like, let's say it's your internal like compliance training that you have to do every year, and you get a badge out of that. They're gonna ask, why am I getting this badge? So
so
so you really need to think about those gamification aspects of your learning if you want to use that. And there's a lot of potential that can be leveraged there, but you need to also drive that engagement in other ways. Gamification does not do it itself.
yeah, I completely agree, and I suppose this is kind of a good catch-all that kind of covers Laura's question, which is I tend to look at it from the perspective of does using so if you take the purpose of what you're doing, the goal, to change behavior or to improve a skill set, does doing it in a certain medium provide a benefit? And if so, what is that benefit? And are there other benefits from other mediums that you could choose? And typically, if you can't derive a benefit from doing it a certain way, you shouldn't do it that way. Um, and
Very well put.
it
Yeah.
will become apparent quite quickly which ones will work. So obviously, video is a visual tool. You can animate. You can move quite quickly through content. So it's a great way to explain something in a short, meaningful way. But if you're trying to explain complex topics, maybe video is part of that, but not the entire piece. Likewise, I mean, a similar way, podcasts are great for when it's conversation. Today on stream, we haven't got your camera, so I've left the graphic up so people can see the topics we're talking about and where we're seeing them fit. Um, but from a podcasting perspective, these kind of conversations are great, but you wouldn't want to necessarily explain something hugely technical that required you to use visual cues via a podcast. So you've got to find, you've got to work out those pieces. What does my medium add value? We have a question as well via a different method, not in the chat, via LinkedIn, for one of the people that was on our last stream as well. And this one's a bit of an interesting one, maybe a challenge, Yuho, which is I'll read it out verbatim. I suppose I would ask the question: what is a good way to monitor or assess learning during this time without quizzes or tests? So there's a challenge for you.
Reporting and analytics. Period. That's what you want to do. That's what you want to do instead of trying to come up with these. I view exams, especially in digital learning space, as arbitrary decisions about what should we ask about this content in order to determine what people know about it. That's not really what we want to know when we're looking at how people are using the system and what they're potentially getting out of it. What we want to see is how they are using the content, what types of content they're using, how long they're spending in the system, what who other users they are interacting with, and how. And like these kinds of questions will, I feel, give us a lot more insight into, first of all, how people are getting value from the system, and two, um, how should we develop it further. I was kind of coming to this also from a previous point, but when I think we're going to talk about data and analytics in a later stream, but I kind of want to touch this just quickly, that when you're designing a system and you're mapping out those use cases that I've been mentioning over and over again here as well, one thing that you really need to understand is that you can do as much user research as you can, and you should, and you should really think about those use cases, but you're still designing that first version of the platform based on a hypothesis. The important thing is that with that hypothesis, you're setting up meaningful measuring points. So you're thinking about, what kind of data do I want to get out of this system, and what do I want to try to deduce based on that data. And when you get that data, the hypothesis kind of starts moving from a theoretical approach to an actual approach that does bring that value, because you can see, okay, this content is good, this content is not getting a lot of engagement. You can then ask questions: is the content bad, or could it be improved, or is it just not a topic that people are interested in or finding value in, and all those questions. Up until that point that you actually take a look at the data and what the analytics tools say, you are once again more or less stabbing in the dark. You have to start somewhere so that you get the data, but it's really important to understand that the first iteration of the platform is rarely the final one. You do want to develop that further. That kind of maybe went off rails a bit here, but I hope that kind of brought maybe at least some kind of an answer for the LinkedIn question.
No, I've asked that in LinkedIn, but for me, it definitely did, and I couldn't agree more. And Laura and I have said this on multiple streams now, which is you have to start with the end goal in mind, and that's the same when designing the platform or the experience for your learners. Is that if you don't have a clear goal and don't have clear measures in place, then how do you know you're succeeding? Laura's put a really interesting comment in the chat as well, which is about, it's not always about knowledge acquisition, it's also about practice, reflection, experimentation, discussion, which I couldn't agree more with.
Definitely.
Those engagement techniques, and we spoke about it, I think I spoke about it quite a bit on the last stream about social tools and the move of people to things like Teams and Slack. And I definitely agree that those are useful tools, and it isn't just about ramming knowledge down people's throats.
Mm-hmm.
Those kind of tools. So if I focus on the social areas, and we kind of have maybe not given this as much focus as maybe we should have done, but the way I see those personally is that they are excellent at supplementing and helping to continue that engagement, as opposed to being necessarily the hook that pulls people in the first instance. Laura and I will talk on the next stream about how we create compelling content that engages the learner, gets them interested, gets them motivated to move on to the next piece. But one of those pieces in that puzzle is those social tools, where you can continue to have the conversation, whether that's within a specific cohort, whether that's across the whole organisation. Those tools are massively important for continuing that discussion and keeping that learning going. And there are others as well, like third-party curated content and other third-party social media. What you need to do in terms of drive engagement is make sure that you are integrating with those where appropriate and not forcing the issue. I mean, to your point, you said about the, we organisations haven't necessarily been using forums and things like that in maybe to the best of their abilities. And I think some of that might come from the fact that Slack and Teams have grown so rapidly, there's a question of, well, where do I start and stop using that functionality and start using a forum on a learning platform?
Exactly. That's like one of the biggest points with the social tools and the social learning aspects is that people are kind of thinking about, okay, so social media does this and this, and instant messaging does this and this. You're not trying to compete with those tools with your environment. You should try to look at integrating them somehow, because they are already there and they are spending millions and billions of dollars in being the best in their field. So don't try to reinvent the wheel when it's a lot more. It can be a lot more useful to take a better look at how we can actually bring them to be a part of this system. And of course, there are things like, for example, using a discussion forum. That's of course kind of unrelated, because there you can make people talk about the system and the content, and actually the social learning will happen there. And with like instant messaging tools, you can really predetermine what people are going to talk about or should talk about. They're going to use it for conversation, and conversations can go anywhere. It's not necessarily only about learning. So what I'm trying to get at is building a social learning tools, or a social learning platform, is once again about the platform itself. If it's clear, easy to use, easy to navigate, easy to find content, and the content, if the content actually brings value and answers people's questions, and brings them something. As Laura mentioned, it's not only about ramming knowledge down their throats. It's also about practice and reflecting, experimenting, and then also the discussion mentioned there. So if you don't have a platform that has good form and good content that drives engagement kind of by itself, these external things like social learning tools and those aspects are kind of hard to make, or it can be a difficult place to try to get people to use them if they're not using the rest of the platform either. So once again, these things kind of feed into each other. They are not they are very interdependent.
We have a couple of comments from different areas. So Laura's posted in the chat asking, are we seeing people experiment with social tools and learning now, that face to face is limited, or are we seeing mainly digital? I have my opinion on that one, and you, if you want to weigh in, but I am definitely seeing people exploring the idea of it. I think it's
Hmm.
too soon to say how well that's going to be taken up. Um, but I think, whenever I speak to people, talking about people want to create communities of practice, or best practice, and there's a desire from learning to do it. It's whether or not they can get the learners there, whether or not they can, um, either make it part of their daily routine, or as you have said, like, take something that they're already using, like a Slack or something like that, and utilize that to drive those as a social tool. So it's a for me, it's a case of, I think it's probably too soon to tell if they're being put into practice. But I would say there, from my perspective, I've seen an increase in desire to utilize those with the lack of other
Definitely.
tools. And we've touched on this a few times. Video calling is a good example. People are turning on their videos now that they weren't doing beforehand, and we're seeing everyone's, the decorating. They're not necessarily wearing a shirt and or a blouse, and they're in a t-shirt. So I think the walls are being broken down because of what's going on, but I don't know A, if that will last, or B, how that's going to manifest. I think it's a bit too soon. Your thoughts, Hugo?
Yeah. I don't think it's too soon. In a way, um, I'm trying to formulate a thought here. Just a second. I think it really comes down to knowing how, if you're designing a learning platform for an organization, for your organization, you need to know how they communicate, what tools they use, and what purpose do they use those tools for. And then you find those social learning areas and the tools that support those areas. Because if you try to just give them something new that's not something that they are maybe used to, or that it's difficult to find the value in without actually forcing them to use it, you're not going to get the desired results. Potentially, you're not going to get the desired results. So it's really, once again, about knowing your organization, knowing their needs, so mapping out those use cases. I have seen both successes and failures when it comes to so designing how to use social learning tools. And the easiest ones are definitely, something that enables you to have a discussion or give feedback, learn as a group. These kinds of tools that do not really require people to do something that they would have to specifically learn how to do. Everybody knows how to have a conversation, hopefully, and everybody pretty much knows how to work in a group. So it's really about how to enable that on the technical level. And when you got that and you get a good platform and good content that has been thought out, it usually works. It kind of ties into that nicely, and then it starts building upon itself, and people are starting to use those tools little by little. But at the same time, you can have something that's overly ambitious, too complicated, not really well thought out, and it just kind of dwindles out. It's not seeing any engagement, and it just sits there in the dusty corner of the environment, and nobody's clicking on a discussion forum or something like that, if it doesn't actually fit the design. But as you mentioned about, people using more video feeds and everything right now, if there's a silver lining to be found in this global situation, I think is that we are getting incredibly interesting and important data about how people are using, how people are communicating remotely, how they are using remote learning and digital learning tools. This is something that we haven't ever gotten data on this scale before.
On the point about data, the person I'm having a conversation with on via LinkedIn, because they can't use the YouTube chat for various reasons, kind of came back and said, yeah, that did really answer the question, by the way, on the whole reporting piece. But there's a question about how do we engage, how do we ensure the participants are engaged with the materials, and how do we report that? And we, as you mentioned, earlier, that we are doing one on the specifics of data, and there's also actually a webinar being run by a colleague of mine in the US. And another external consultant. I believe it's next Thursday. So we'll post that information about that. It's on our blogs, but I'll make sure I post it into my LinkedIn so everyone can see and join that webinar around data. So it goes into that more specifically. But the data is hugely important. And to answer the question that came via LinkedIn, engage to understand what people are engaging with materials is a mixture of how are they navigating through the platform. So those kind of platform analytics about what's their workflow like, how are they entering in, what are they navigating to, and what's their click through from certain locations.
Mm-hmm.
But then also, and we're delving potentially a little bit here into the actual content of things, which we might touch on next stream, but it's how are they moving through that content. And right now it's possible to track what people are looking at in content, whether it's the page they go to or the time code of a video that they start at or stop at or skip past. These things are possible within content, providing your system is set up correctly. And the key bit to that, I think, and you, I'm sure you'd agree with me, is SCORM is a way of tracking it in the old way, and in the new way, XAPI is the preferred method for capturing data at that level. And if you're not creating XAPI ready content or have a platform that supports the creation of XAPI statements on not just your content but also the platform itself, then it becomes more of a challenge to access that information about how people are going through the platform and using the content. Not impossible, but your data set will definitely be restricted. And you also follow on to talk about business leaders and what they want to see. And again, we're going to touch on this on the data podcast, but just to tease data stream, but to tease that, today we are making reports that can compare people that go through training in say a cybersecurity space with the number of incidents that are being made within the business. Those those alignments of learner behavior to business performance or business results or occurrences or events, whatever you want to call them, that is possible now with the data that can be captured on platform. It's a question, as Juho made earlier, or sorry, Juho, should I say, made earlier. We are you've got to set the system up to be able to capture that information, and set yourself up to be able to do that. Doing it after the fact is a challenge. Any more thoughts on that, Juho? I'm conscious of time here, but I'm just trying to figure out.
Just to quickly chime in and how Laura in the comments rephrased the question in a bit. So how are people using the content back in the workplace? Well, you can measure how they're using the learning system, and I guess then it comes down to larger integrations. They don't have to be technical integrations, mind you, but if you're using some other technical tool, you're using your laptop when you're working, there are ways to also get data out of usage of those programs that you're utilizing. And it doesn't have to be like IT work. It can be basically anything. It really comes down to then understanding what you're measuring in terms of learning, and then what you're measuring in terms of your business. So there are multiple fields that you could pay attention to. One very, very generic level example that has been kind of thrown around in analytics and reporting is that, let's say that you're having a fire safety course online, and you kind of don't want the measuring point of the impact of that learning to be an actual fire. You kind of want to be able to tell that this is impactful learning before there's an actual incident. So it's of course on once again a kind of a hypothetical step in the dark kind of way. But when you set up those measuring points, and maybe you can have those exams and quizzes and all that if you want, about testing that knowledge and testing the practices even. Now we're not talking about fire safety anymore, just on general level. But of course, really, it's not something that translates into, let's say, increased productivity instantly. You should see that over time. And then, of course, there's the question, how much of this can be tied to the learning and how much of this can be tied to other improvements in personal area or HR or whatever. So it's not very clear cut, of course, how to see what the impact of using that content is in the work itself. But that doesn't mean that we cannot measure it, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does.
Does to me. Hopefully they answered the question in the chat there. And for Laura, thank you for rephrasing that. I think it's a great point, and
definitely
we're jumping into territory here that we are going to cover on subsequent streams. So we don't want to give away the keys to the kingdom too soon. But yeah, one final point from me, unless there are any other questions that come via the chat, is I said I'd talk about it, which is about additional engagement. And we've touched on a couple of those points before, or even gamification on this stream. But the final two in there, mark-on systems and ad campaigns, I just want to talk about, because I think, and this is something I've been talking about for a while, and I've seen other consultants or thought leaders within the industry talking about this as well, which is, how do you get people to platform, and how do you keep them, accessing new content? And we've spoken about the tools that we have in our toolbox, such as all these different media types and content types that we can utilize, and the way that we set up the platform for best success. I said we'll talk about the actual creation of compelling content with Laura on the next stream, but you've got to get people to platform. You've got to keep them coming in, and when they're in there, you still need to market at them. And one of the things that I think learning could do better is in that realm, and particularly in maybe mirroring some of the qualities that we see in teams outside of learning, like marketing. And that's why I've put those mark-on systems and ad campaigns in there. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples where, if you think about this is happening all the time when you're browsing through other systems that, frankly, LXPs and LMSs often get compared to nowadays. So if you think of YouTube, for example, like many LXPs and LMSs, there are recommendation algorithms that play pushing content to you, which is another way of helping to engage a learner. But what they do at the end of most videos is they say, here's another similar here's something you could watch. Here's a similar content based upon the fact you've been through this. So it's kind of running its own little ad campaign, if you will, on that topic area. And in feeds like that, you start to see similar trends coming through. But maybe more overtly would be something like Netflix, where when you log onto your Netflix, and I did this last night, I've got all their new shows that they've ploughed money into over the last 6 to 12 months in terms of content creation. They've got that front and center. They're advertising. Here's all our Netflix specials. Here's all the new stuff we've come up with, and look at all these big name actors we've got involved in this. Now, I appreciate that what we're not talking about is entertainment with A-list celebrities from Hollywood, but what we are talking about is them actively marketing the content that they've spent time and effort creating to make sure that there is a return on the investment. But also that it entertains and people will come back wanting more. And fundamentally, if you take the movie or the the ability to binge watch a TV series out of it, and you replace that with learning content, or any of the mediums that you see here on screen, then actually we're talking about something that's very similar. And those techniques shouldn't be ignored. So we should be using some form of discrete or even overt marketing on our learning platforms to show what's new in learning, and that should be updated more than once every 6 months. Having a catch-all box that says here's what's new and click on it doesn't count. I think having actual targeted campaigns works. And the benefit of that as well, and this is kind of coming back maybe even to the engagement question from LinkedIn earlier, is that you would start to understand the level of engagement you have on a topic area prior to them ever even reaching platform. If you were using Marcom software, you'd know who's clicking on which emails, which emails and which pieces of content are compelling. So you'd start to understand, well, for example, we're rolling out this piece of training to this community, and for some reason, this email seems to get a load of click-throughs. So maybe next time we try to get people involved, we'll use this kind of language, this terminology, and maybe phrase it in this way, maybe with this visual style or video, whatever's accompanying it, because that's showing a good way for us to engage with our learner base. And so you can start engagement prior to them even hitting the platform.
I would like to add a quick point about Netflix, and of course, it's a different use case. People are using that for entertainment, and it's not directly translatable to learning, but definitely the design and the layout is very appealing and easy to use. So that does drive up their engagement levels. But one point that I would like to make is that, especially with Netflix, I mean, we are familiar with the content. We know what a movie is, and we know what a television series is. We know what a documentary is. And this is also, if you're going to present your content in a very simplified way, you need to also give your learners something that they already are kind of familiar with. Because if in your recommendation stream, you're gonna see a group quiz game, something very ambitious and like top like very very new, and I'm not finding the words here, but I hope you get what I'm implying. So something very very ambitious, basically, and then next to it you're gonna have a 2-minute video. I would bet my head on that people are gonna watch that video if it's on the same topic. They're not gonna try this very very something that seems complicated and unfamiliar. So when you are trying to use these many different methods that you can for creating content, new and shiny and great and ambitious doesn't always mean better. If you're thinking about engagement in the system, learning happens when people feel safe. And if people feel unsafe, they are not going to learn. Make your learners feel safe. That comes down to both clarity of the platform, so that whatever they are recommended and however they are recommended the content, it also gives them the feeling that they know what they're looking at. If they don't, they are going to get scared and they are not going to engage with the content. I guess that's my final point for this video.
No, and I was going to say that is a perfect point to end on. I think I'm conscious of time. We are currently running the record for the longest stream thus far that we've done. So well done, Juho. Thank you for your contribution to those in chats.
Thank you. This was
engaging as well. I'll close the closing screen. If there's any conversations or chats or questions that people want to ask, I think people have probably already done it by now. Just a couple of clean-up things to say. These streams are going out every Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. British Standard Time. So we'll see everybody next week. As I mentioned before, we have a webinar which I'll post out about on LinkedIn, so you can see that if anybody's interested in attending that webinar next week if you haven't already signed up. We are still trying to get onto LinkedIn, so it's easier for a lot of people to access and see this without having to come and jump over to YouTube from LinkedIn. So we're still working on that application being pushed through the various processes, but I'm sure everyone can understand that LinkedIn are a bit backed up on that one, I think. So the time being, we'll stay on here. So if you want to get notifications about the upcoming streams and things like that, please subscribe to the Valamis channel this video is going out on, because then you'll get notifications that we've gone live, and for anything we post up. So that would just helps you out. But other than that, I'm available. Juho, you're on LinkedIn, so you can be contacted if people want to connect to you as well.
Yes.
And next week on Tuesday, it's Laura and I continue this conversation, but at a content-based level as opposed to maybe platform. But yeah, great. Thank you, and thank you, Laura, for contributing, and look forward to having you on next week. So other than that, have a great rest of the week, everybody. Great weekend. Stay safe as per usual, and see you on the other side of the weekend. Cheers, everybody.